Great. So just a little bit about me and my credentials. I'm a licensed professional counselor within the state of Michigan. Currently I'm with Excel. We have offices in Oakland, Washtenaw, and Livingston counties. I do individual and group therapy in these counties. I specialize in autism spectrum disorder, autism and sexuality, and the overlap between autism and LGBTQ+, which we will get to a little bit later in the presentation. I'm also an active participant in the LGBTQ+ work group that is in Livingston County. I worked with Wentworth and Associates in Utica, where I provided LGBTQ+ affirmative therapy from internship up until I left in October of 2018. I'm also a member of this community. I'm a bisexual woman. I use the term pansexual, and we will get there a little bit in the presentation. So just real quick, so I know who I'm talking to, do we have any teachers, teacher consultants hanging out? Great. School counselors, social workers, psychologists, fantastic. MRS folks, hello, welcome. Anybody else that I didn't Does anybody want to throw out, like?
ESGT.
Okay. Okay. Anybody brave enough to volunteer why you picked this presentation?
We have two students who are transition in our program. Not everyone has the right rates.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah?
Just increasing numbers of this community at high school where I work.
Fantastic. Okay, yes?
Intersectionality is quite interesting for this population, especially those with disabilities.
I agree. It's a very under-discussed, the intersectionality,
Right.
under-researched, unfortunately, which we will cover as well.
Right.
So just to make it clear, if at any point anybody has any questions, I'm going to be flying through quite a bit of material, especially on the vocab. Raise your hand, shout your question out. If you want to stick it on a carrier pigeon and send it up here, I'm cool with that. Just make sure that if you have questions, you are asking them so you can go ahead and address those. So our first little chunk here is going to be some vocabulary. So does anybody happen to know the definition for gender? Brave enough to shout it out? No? Okay. Ta-da, there it is. Gender is social constructs, or our ideas, our beliefs, and our attitudes associated with someone's sex. This includes our gender roles or our notions that women wear dresses, men are supposed to show emotion, things like that. What about sex, the noun? What is that? Perfect, thank you so much. Your biological reproductive system, so your primary sex characteristics such as your genitals, or your secondary sex characteristics, so hip width, muscle to fat ratio, voice pitch, things like that. And then what about sexual orientation? You're physically attracted to, based on the perceived gender or sex of another person. So our most common identity is cisgender and heterosexual. So when somebody is cisgender, all that means is they identify with the gender or sex they were assigned at birth. So they're born, doctor says congrats, it's a girl, they grow up, they still believe they're a girl. I am actually not sure of the root of the word. And heterosexual is when someone is attracted to the gender or sex opposite of their own. Percentage-wise, as I mentioned, these are the most common. The thing I kind of wanted to point out here is that the younger folks are starting to abbreviate this because saying cisgender / heterosexual is a mouthful. So you may see it as cis/het, cis-het, or some people stick it all into one word, which is how I first encountered it, and I didn't know what that meant, and I spent 15 minutes falling down the Google well trying to figure it out. So to save you all the headache, if you see that squished into one word, it just means cisgender and heterosexual. So our LGBT, what is our L? Lesbian. Fantastic. Our G? Gay. Just to pause, so you're aware, some lesbians are perfectly okay with being referred to as gay. Some are not. You're gonna get this message a couple times throughout the presentation. Always mirror the language the person is using. So if they introduce themselves to you or they disclose to you that they're a lesbian, follow that unless you hear them use another word. What is B?
Bisexual.
Fantastic. Being attracted to more than one gender or sex. The terms pansexual and omnisexual, how many people have heard those before? Great. Those just kind of evolved as our gender discussions keep happening and we are now acknowledging that there's more than two genders. Obviously bi means two, so pan and omni have evolved to address the fact that there are more than two genders and people can be attracted to more than two genders. And then transgender, someone who identifies with the gender opposite of the sex or gender that they were assigned at birth. So what does the Q mean? Questioning. Not certain of what terminology to use. Maybe their identity hasn't crystallized yet. This happens a lot with the youth. They may start saying that they're gay, and then they might start exploring, well, maybe I'm gender fluid, maybe I'm trans, I'm not quite sure where I fall yet. That is super common. There's also another usage of Q is a lot of folks in the community are using the word queer now. You may have heard the term like gender queer is pretty common. So just be aware that that's being said, and also just be aware that there is a derogatory history of the word, so don't go out throwing it everywhere, but if you hear somebody in the community using it, it's becoming more popular. Anybody know where the, oh yeah.
Do you use that? Do you use the word queer if someone who is identifying themselves as that, you can use that?
Ask them.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep, some folks in the community are super cool with other people using it, some are not. It's all personal preference. Do we know why a plus sign?
It's just more letters.
Yes, a lot of them. Which is a great thing, honestly. I can tell you when I was in high school, a lot of the letters that, and the identities that are now being used or being talked about weren't really discussed. And I'll get more to that in a second, but just the plus is the simplest way to accommodate the ever-expanding vocabulary. This is just a little webcomic of some pride flags, and this is not all of them by any means. As our language evolves, we get more and more terminology. And I did not put this up here to scare anybody. I can tell you there are quite a few of these that I've never used or encountered myself. And just be aware that it continues to grow and expand. Some of the more common ones that you may see, intersex, does anybody know what intersex is? It used to be the term hermaphrodite, and we don't use that anymore because it's very derogatory in nature. So now we use the term intersex. Non-binary, which we can get to in a minute, gender fluid, agender and asexual, meaning agender folks don't identify with the gender, asexual folks have little to no sexual attraction. What was that?
Any girl, any boy.
So those are folks who don't necessarily fit within the binary, but maybe they feel that they are slightly more masculine or slightly more feminine than being smack dab in the middle.
Sorry, I gotta ask, who's
Huh? Bear is a subsect of the gay community. It tends to refer to men. There's kind of the notion like men are like bigger guys who are like super hairy. Honestly, but there's affirmations in Ferndale actually has a support group just for the subsect of the gay community that identifies as bears. So just to get a little bit more into the gender stuff, historically the term transgender was used to describe people who were not cisgender. We don't really use transsexual anymore. It's kind of faded away. But what has started to kind of come about is the term non-binary. And the LGBT Foundation defines that as a gender that is in between or does not fit into the category of man or woman. Some folks who are transgender use the term non-binary. Some folks who are non-binary do not use the term transgender. So again, just make sure you're mirroring the language that the person is using. And if you don't know, just ask. It's not offensive to say, should I refer to you as a transgender person? Should I refer to you as a non-binary? That's acceptable. So with that, we have transition. So that is when someone undergoes changes in order to align more closely with their gender. So we have a social transition, that's changing your name, using different pronouns, changing how you dress, maybe you wear makeup, maybe you cut all your hair off. And then we have medical transition, so it's hormones, top or bottom surgery, there's facial feminization, some folks get their Adam's apple shape, things like that. Not every transgender person undergoes any transition, and that's okay. They're still a trans person. And even if they do, they don't always complete each part of a transition. Transition is extremely, especially the medical, is very cost prohibitive. Bottom surgery alone is tens of thousands of dollars, and most folks don't just have that laying around. Some folks also don't feel what we call dysphoria, which is like a very deep discomfort with the body. So they just elect not to have any surgery. And with all of this, there are now tools being developed to help folks identify what or any parts of transition are right for them, or how to express themselves or their sexuality. Has anybody heard of the genderbread person? Yeah. A couple. I'm going to introduce you to my updated friend, the gender unicorn. Isn't it cute? I love it so much. You can find this at transstudent.org/gender, or if you Google gender unicorn, it pops right up. And what I really like about this is we have our gender identity, our gender expression, because these don't always match for many, many reasons, sometimes for safety, sometimes just personal choice. What sex they were assigned at birth, what they're physically attracted to, and what they're emotionally attracted to. Typically those line up, occasionally they don't, so just be aware of that. And you can actually download a version of this that's a coloring page, and I've worked with some youth with that, so they can go in and color, well, okay, my gender identity is female, but I fall on this other arrow for expression, I really like looking androgynous, and I was assigned male, and I'm physically and emotionally attracted to men. So they can kind of color, or maybe that their identity is mostly female, but a little male, and they can really kind of map it out and get a good visual on that. Any questions on terminology? No? Okay, great. So mental health. The National Center for Transgender Equality put out a survey in 2015 funded by the Arcus Foundation. This was the largest transgender study, I think still to date. 27,000 respondents across the country. That's phenomenal. It's very hard to get this community to respond just because there's a lot of fear that comes with being out or responding to things about your identity. So, and what I really liked about this survey is there was a whole subset of transgender folks with disabilities. That is super hard to find in research. Obviously, this is just a survey. It's not a formal research article, but this is one of the biggest sources of information that we have right now in that subset. So what they found of those respondents who had disability, about a quarter of them were underemployed. Almost half were living in poverty. Almost 60% were experiencing serious psychological distress that would have needed some kind of intervention or attention. 54% had attempted suicide in their lifetime, and 42% were mistreated by healthcare providers, and that includes all healthcare providers, mental health therapists, and of all 27,000 respondents, 40% had attempted suicide at some point in their lifetime versus 4.6% of the general population. So this is almost 10 times higher attempt rates than the general population. The LGBTQ+ community as a whole experiences higher rates of violence and abuse, including domestic partner abuse, higher rates of mental health concerns and substance abuse. There was a study done on LGBTQ plus youth, and they found that they are 4 to 6 times more likely to make a suicide attempt that results in serious illness or injury and needs immediate medical attention. And those that had no family support were 8.4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their supported peers in the LGBTQ community. Support is paramount. We're talking about it more, which is fantastic. There are celebrities who are out now, so there are role models, which is incredible. But that support piece is always going to remain the most important part, in my opinion, of working with this population, is making sure that they have support that they need, that they have somewhere safe to go, and that they have somebody to talk to. Gender and sexuality denial in individuals with disabilities. For some strange reason, people still think that folks who have disability are not sexual beings. Surprise, they are, and some of them are gay. And they know it. And they're just as valid as anybody else who says that they are gay. Gender tends to be heavily denied within this community, gender variance. I work with a lot of folks who are on the spectrum and who are trans and non-binary, and the story I hear every single time is that somebody tells them that they don't know their own gender because they're on the spectrum. You don't understand social cues, you don't understand this, that, or the other. How can you know anything about yourself? And I just wanted to take a quick moment to touch on conversion therapy and reparative therapy. I feel like the conversation on these things has died down. There's this notion that I think is hanging out there that this doesn't happen anymore. Obviously, like state licensing boards and ethics boards are really saying like you can't do this, but it's still out there. The Restored Hope Network is still up and kicking. They just released a 2018. It's like an audio like webinar type thing, and they don't use the term conversion therapy, but it's a very similar principle that you can kind of get the gay out or get the trans out or whatever is happening. And just last year, the Metro City Church in Riverview was protested because they were putting on a program that people felt was conversion therapy. The church adamantly denied it, so I'm not going to say one way or the other, but there were active protests that happened. And just so you're aware, all these places that are this bluish purple is where conversion therapy is banned, legally. Michigan is super gray.
Also, we forgot to mention there's lawsuits going over in the court system
Yes.
to turn those purples back into those